You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Of course, many folks were paying lots of attention to the trial of Amber Guyger. She, of course, is the former Dallas police officer who shot and killed Botham Jean in his apartment, she says, mistaking it for hers. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 10 years in jail. But it was what took place after that caused lots of folks talking. Judge Tammy Kemp was the one who was sitting on the bench presiding over this trial, and she, of course, has received lots of criticism, and so we talked to her, and she said, would love to come on and share her thoughts about exactly what took place in her courtroom. Judge Kemp, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to start here, first and foremost. We started this trial off. It was very interesting because a lot of people who were talking about you initially when you showed disdain or disgust with the Dallas County District Attorney for giving an interview the day before the trial. And so there were a lot of people who were saying, man, this black female judge, she doesn't play, don't mess with her. And you go from that to by the end of this trial, you had folks who were calling you all sorts of names, who were calling you coon, who were calling you a sellout, who were saying that you were aiding and abetting white supremacy. How did you feel when this onslaught on social media, on radio, on television, all these different places where they were attacking you for what you did by showing, as you said this morning to be on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, showing compassion to Amber Guyger?
Well, the good thing was I didn't hear any of the attacks. The trial concluded Wednesday afternoon. Thursday, I came into work to clean up some loose ends, and I went on a retreat to East Texas Friday morning. And I'm not on social media, so I did not hear the attacks. Saturday morning, when I was notified about the death of Joshua Brown, I was also told about the attacks on social media. And what I believed and thought was, I didn't realize that the victim impact statement had been aired on Court TV, but nevertheless, I don't think the persons who were attacking me had witnessed the victim impact statement on Court TV. Now, insofar as calling me a coon or a sellout, anyone that would say that about me does not know me. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. Then I'm an African American. And I don't think I behaved in any way that any other decent human being might not have behaved, confronted with the same circumstances. My courtroom has never been filled with the level of emotion that it was filled with during that victim impact statement. Brent John brought a level of humanity and compassion that was shocking, overwhelming, and just showed a level of maturity and grace that I hope to attain one day.
First of all, I think for a lot of people who folks who don't even follow trials, it's not as if people really understand how cameras are allowed into the courtroom, and that's most important. I think that's first. But second of all, as this was going along, you had people who were really upset, people who were angry. Do you believe that the visceral reaction was a result of folks' anger, not just at what they saw you do, but because the jury chose to sentence her to just 10 years in prison?
I think a large part of it had to do with the jury's 10-year sentence. I think the vast majority of the people that were outside my courtroom chanting had expected a much longer sentence, and they were disappointed in the decision of the jury. I think for a lot of people, in essence, we've taken someone who represented almost a perfect sacrifice, Mr. Jean, and then we have the police officer who is obviously caused his death. And because we have such a long history of police officers not paying the price when they've killed innocent black men, I think the vast majority of persons expected something more. And I think some of the backlash has to do with just that raw emotion of not feeling as though justice was served in the death of Mr. Jean. That's part of it. And then the other part was it was portrayed as though I went to Miss Guyger and embraced her with a hug, and nothing could have been further from the truth. What actually happened, as I do in every murder case, when all is said and done, the trial had been concluded, the victim impact statements had been given, I always go to the victim's family and express my condolences to them. And I usually say something to the person on their way to prison. In this instance, I visited with the Jean family. They are absolutely remarkable people, absolutely amazing. And their dignity and grace throughout this trial was just an example for all of us. And after I visited with each of them and hugged each of them, I was headed back to my office, and I just glanced at Miss Guyger, and I thought about the grace that Brant Jean had extended her, and I just said to her, Miss Guyger, Mr. Jean has forgiven you. Please forgive yourself so that you can live a purposeful life when you get out of prison. And that's all I intended to say to her. And then she said to me, she asked me if I thought that her life could have purpose. And I said, of course it can. And she also asked me if I thought God would forgive her. And I said, yes, he will. And then she said to me, well, I don't own a Bible. I don't have a Bible. I don't know where to begin. And that's when I said, I'll get you a Bible. And I did leave the courtroom and went to my chambers and retrieved my Bible. And I did point her to John 3:16. I read it with her, and I explained it to her. And I asked her to read it again and insert her name where it says the whosoever, so she could understand that God has done this for her as well. And she asked me a few other questions. I explained to her that she just needed a mustard seed amount of faith. She had some other questions. Where do I go after I've read this? I told her to read the Gospels. I told her, well, you really need a study Bible. This isn't a great Bible for somebody just starting out. And then she asked me if I would give her a hug. And I was taken aback. I've hugged a lot of defendants, but I've never hugged anyone on their way to prison. No one has ever asked me to give them a hug as they've been on their way to prison. And when she asked a second time, I just thought, well, who am I to refuse this woman a hug? And so I said, yes, I will give you a hug. And that's what happened.
So you, when you mentioned going over the Bible verses with the guys, go back to the video, because I think in the moment you're going to actually see where the two of you embrace. You're sharing this with her. We've had people who said separation of church and state. Go back to the video, please. Separation of church and state. Do you agree with that? They said because here you were the judge presiding over the case. We're playing the video right now where you're talking to her and your Bible is open and everything that you just described is actually happening. Do you believe that should be the role of judges, or do you believe that in hindsight this should have taken place outside the cameras? Were you even realizing the cameras were still on, were actually showing this?
I didn't realize that the cameras were still on, but it would not have mattered to me whether they were on or off. I'm not going to be any different behind the cameras than I am in front of them. I'm going to be the same person. And let's talk about this separation between the church and the state. There are two principles that need to be made clear here. First of all, the trial was concluded. All of my legal obligations were concluded. Second of all, as a judge, I have a responsibility to uphold a certain level of dignity 24 hours a day, every day where I go. That doesn't preclude me from taking part in worship services and being a Christian. And if we're going to take it to that extreme, I don't know if we're going to have any persons to serve. So there cannot be an absolute separation of church and state, in as much as my responsibilities to govern myself in a particular manner extend 24 hours a day. That would be unreasonable. But my legal responsibilities had concluded. That's why the victim impact statement can only take place after the sentence has been imposed. It is not on the record. It is not a part of the official court record. So I don't know what the Ethics Commission will decide, but I do not believe that I have violated my responsibility.
A complaint was filed against you because of this hug. Go ahead, go back to the video. And this, if I look at this whole exchange, we're talking here about, it was about 4.5 minutes. It was about 4.5 minutes. And so I think, again, people may have seen a very quick clip versus seeing that whole, where you really talked to her for about 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And we see, and playing the video right now. I mean, we see where how you're very animated and in talking with her.
And let's talk about what that was, because a lot of people said that I was praying with her and talking with her. When you see me being animated,
right?
Miss Guyger was complimenting me and telling me that I was such a good person, that I had been fair to her, and that I was really good and I hadn't done anything wrong, and she was such a bad person. Now, what I said to her was, Miss Guyger, no one is perfect. Only Christ is perfect. And I basically just tried to do my job. And I told her, if all of our lives were put on display as hers has been, you would find something wrong with everybody's life. But that doesn't matter. Only Christ had to be perfect. And I told her, don't let Botham's death have been in vain. Please be a better person coming out of prison than you are going in. And she told me she would bring my Bible back to me in 10 years.
There also was another situation that happened in court actually before that, where one of was she a bailiff in your courtroom who at one point we see her where she appears to be stroking the hair of Amber Guyger. And people just, lost it. They were saying that the language that folks were using were saying how she was somehow aiding white supremacy, how she was wrong for this. It's all sort of vicious things that were being said. I saw you on Tamron Hall's show where you wanted to make it perfectly clear to explain what actually happened there. So can you explain to our audience what took place?
Yes, and I really appreciate you educating the audience about these things, because that's so crucial. If you'll recall, the guilty verdict for Ms. Guyger came about, I think I got notice from the bailiffs about 10:15, 10:20 or so. And it was about 11 o'clock that we presented the verdict of guilt for murder. Ms. Guyger had been on bond, which meant she was free to move about anywhere in the state of Texas for all intents and purposes, except she needed to be present during trial. Immediately after that verdict came in, I issued an order holding her bond insufficient, which meant she was no longer free to walk about. But I also gave the attorneys a 2-hour lunch break. And I knew that, generally speaking, to process her through the Dallas County Jail would be about a 3-hour time commitment. So I asked the bailiffs if they could get permission to keep Ms. Guyger in the courtroom and not process her until the end of the day. They did, and I limited her movements. What you see, and I don't know what court TV broadcast because I wasn't privy to it, but what you will see if you were able to see it all is that female bailiff who happened to be an extra person coming to work in my court. She belongs to another court, but she gave Miss Guyger the equivalent of what you or I might have received should we be going through TSA. She patted her down, her entire person. And what you see when you say she's stroking her hair is her checking her hair for paraphernalia and or weapons. We have all manner of weapons and drugs and other paraphernalia taken into the county jail. And so any woman and or man who's booked in, their hair will be searched. If you have a wig on, it will be removed. If you have extensions, they will be examined. Your hair will be gone through to make certain you don't have any weapons or other paraphernalia that's entering the jail. And that's what you saw that bailiff doing.
And again, what was I mean, when you heard, and guys, go back to it. I mean, you had people who were calling her a mammy, and they were. I mean, how did she take all of this? How did she deal with all of this? Did you could talk to her? Did you communicate with her?
Actually, shortly after this happened, one of the bailiffs came to my chambers and said, "Judge, there's a social media outlash about this particular bailiff having stroked Amber Guyger's hair." And they wanted to be certain that I communicated to Sheriff Marion Brown that I had requested that Amber Guyger be detained there because they knew a thorough search could not have been done. And they wanted, should the issue come up with their employer, that I would communicate to her that this was on my order, that she was kept here in the courtroom. I talked to the bailiff. I told her, I said, "I'm sorry I put you in this position." And she said, "Judge, don't apologize. I'm going to do my job regardless. I'm sorry they don't understand." And that was the end of that.
A lot of people don't really understand the law. They don't understand what happens in courtrooms. They don't understand the nuance of the law. And I remember during this trial when you allowed the jury to consider the Castle Doctrine. And folks just lost it. What is she doing? This is crazy. This wasn't Amber Guyger's home. How could she essentially assert a stand your ground law? And you said as a judge, you not only were thinking about the case, but you were thinking about the fact that this is likely going to get appealed if she's found guilty. So explain to the folks who don't understand the law, who don't understand the Castle Doctrine, why you gave that as a part of the jury instruction.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about the Castle Doctrine generally,
okay,
because I can't talk about the case specifically.
Right.
But the statutory law, as well as the case law, is absolutely crystal clear here in the state of Texas. A defendant is entitled to any legal defense that he can put forth any measure of evidence to support, no matter how good, no matter how bad, no matter whether the judge believes it to be credible or incredible. If there is one scintilla of evidence that this defense could possibly hold true, and a jury of your peers could find that it's reasonable, you are entitled to that defense, pursuant to the penal code and pursuant to all of the case law. It's not so much that I was concerned about whether or not the case would be appealed. Almost every trial is. But I was concerned that I had given this defendant every legal justification that they could possibly fathom, as I would with any defendant. And you are absolutely correct. Had a person been denied a justifiable defense, in all probability, that case would be reversed for that reason. And I believe you had a discussion on what the Castle law entails, and it's a hurdle to get over. But again, the penal code provides for it, case law provides for it, and it's been my experience to deny a defendant a defense, no matter what the court's view of that defense, would result in a reversal.
Avis, question.
Sure. Judge, thanks for joining us tonight. You were quoted once as saying, I wouldn't get criticism if Guyger were a black woman. And I'm wondering if you believe that if the situation were precisely reversed, where Botham Jean went into the wrong apartment and where he murdered Guyger, a white female police officer, do you believe that he would have received 10 years for that and would have been shown, one would argue, the level of compassion that Guyger apparently received throughout the course of this case?
I have no idea what a jury might have done in punishing that scenario. Just as I had no idea what this jury would have done in punishing Ms. Guyger. I can say that if the roles were reversed and the exchange had happened with the black defendant as they happened with Ms. Guyger, the request for a hug would not have been denied. The discussion about the Bible would have been conducted the same way. I would not have done things differently. I have no idea what a jury might have done. I have no idea.
Julian.
Sora, I appreciate you. I realize that you're someplace between a rock and a hard place. At the same time, there are African-American men and women who get more time for less modest crimes. How do you deal with that? Because I just have a problem with it. I've talked to my Sora, your friend, Cheryl Smith. We've talked about this. How do you deal with the inequality of this sentence and of your behavior?
The inequality of the sentence?
Yes, ma'am.
I can't say the jury made that decision. That was not a decision. I will not attack nor quibble with the jury's decision. I never have, I never will. The jury listened to all of the evidence, they arrived at their verdict, and I accept their verdict.
But you chose to walk down to hug that woman. I understand your explanation, but for many of us who find her behavior repugnant, it seemed that you co-signed her behavior.
To believe that I co-signed her behavior is abominable. We talk a lot about reforming the criminal justice system and to see the person beyond the act. Amber Guyger's acts were horrific. The jury reached their verdicts, both on guilt for murder and assessing the punishment. But Amber Guyger will rejoin our society in 10 years or less. And Amber Guyger, I pray, will come out a different person than what she went in. And the other thing I'd like to say is we talk a lot about criminal justice reform. And I hope that reform will require us to look at the person as well as the acts. We need to punish the acts. And if the person is going to rejoin our society, we want them to be better than when they went in. I hope and pray. Because we do not want them to continue to prey upon our communities.
Julian.
And let me say one last thing. I come down off that bench in every murder case and address every victim's family and every defendant. Usually I just simply say to defendants, on a number of occasions, family members have forgiven defendants. And I usually say the same thing. They forgive you, forgive yourself, and come out better than you're going in. And let this be your last contact with the criminal justice system.
Julian?
Judge Kemp, thank you for your service. I support you in what you've done. I will say you can't deny God. I mean, sometimes as a society, we try to remove God from many, many things. And I believe this is an example of God using you. When you got up and you gave her a hug, you comforted her, you brought her Bible. You know, I think we should have compassion. As people, we should have compassion for others and remember that at the end of the day, God has the last say-so in the final judgment. So it's not man or woman that's going to have the last say-so. My question to you would be, what factors, and if you can't answer the question, I understand, what factors go into a sentencing as far as you have a range of Ms. Guyger's, what she can be sentenced to? You have a minimum, you have a maximum. What factors go into that to determine a fair and reasonable amount of time?
Well, here in Texas, the range of punishment for murder is from 5 years to 99 years or life in prison. And of course, the jury could assess a fine not to exceed $10,000. And this, generally speaking, the state tries to bring all of the bad acts and prior felony and misdemeanor offenses that they can identify to present to a jury so that they can demonstrate the person's history with the criminal justice system, if there is any. And then the defense has an opportunity to bring in as many people as they can gather to demonstrate that this person has some redeemable value or has done good things and that they're a good person. And not uncommon, we had both of those things done in this case. And I don't know where it is the jury, why they were swayed one way or another. I know the state asked for 28 years. I don't know how the jury arrived at 10. I never questioned them about that, even in my comments in the jury room as I thanked them again for their service. That's why we have a jury of 12 people to come to reason together.
Judge, I think here's what I think what people, I frankly people don't understand. You are a state judge. This
Correct.
was a jury trial. Federal cases are different, correct?
Absolutely.
So in federal cases, and I've seen it, the jury may render a decision in a federal case, and the judge could frankly throw out that jury's decision and actually provide a different sentence, correct?
You are absolutely correct. And you are correct in saying I am without that power in state court.
So in state court, again, for all these people out here who are commenting, I see all of y'all ridiculous ass comments on YouTube, you don't understand the law. The reality is, in a state court, when the prosecution puts on a case and the prosecution recommends a certain number of years, when they go into that jury room, the jurors are deciding punishment and sentencing. And so in this case here, she could have been sentenced, I think it was up to 99 years. I think that was the number, up to 99 years. Mm-hmm. But the jury made the decision. 5 blacks, 5 Latinos, 2 whites?
You're correct.
So that's what I don't think people understand. This ain't CSI or television. This is a state court. So the jury, so in our system, in state courts, juries are determining those things, not the judge.
Absolutely. And Texas is one of the few states left where the juries assess punishment. But again, that decision is made by the defendant as to whom they would like to assess their punishment.
So the defense, so explain that. So what you're saying is, she and her lawyers could have said, Judge, you assess the penalty, or the jury. So that option is given to the defendant.
Absolutely. And that exercise is done during pretrial hearings.
So before the trial, so just again, and let me say this again for the people out there who are commenting, who are like, well, okay, why are you asking these questions? Because you need to understand stuff before you just assume stuff. So before the trial started, she had to make the decision, I want the jury to decide punishment and not the judge.
Absolutely.
So she could have picked you versus the jury.
Yes.
For sentencing. Could she have picked you to determine innocence or guilt, or was that always the case of a jury?
No, she could have picked me to determine guilt as long as the state agreed. Both parties have to give up their right to a jury trial before a judge can make the determination of guilt or innocence.
So, for instance, in Baltimore, people, again, folks you're watching, in Baltimore, the cops who went on trial for the death of Freddie Gray, they chose a bench trial and not a jury trial, and the judge ruled, frankly, I think it was 3 of them, and they didn't prosecute the 4th one, so when it comes to innocence or guilt, in Texas law, the defense and the prosecution must agree. So if Amber Guyger had said, I want the judge to decide, prosecution, I want the jury to decide, who wins?
If they can't agree, then it will be a jury trial.
So the jury is always the default?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes. And in the case of punishment, if she doesn't specifically say, I want the jury to assess punishment, it's a default to the jury as well.
So both have to agree. Julianne, you got a question? Go ahead.
Sister Judge, do you think the 10-year sentence was sufficient? And if you had to rule, what would you have ruled?
I can't answer that. This case very well may return to my court on appeal. But even if it were not, I will not quibble with the jury's verdict. I will not.
Last question for you, Judge. When we look at these cases, do you believe that people are actually learning more about the nuances here? So, for instance, in other cases, I think back to other cases that have taken place where, especially when a police officer is on trial, there were a lot of people who were thinking that the prosecution overcharged by going for murder. You have cases where it's negligence, where you have homicide, where you have, manslaughter. You have all kinds of different charges. We're dealing with the case in Tarrant County right now as well with the sister who was shot and killed by a police officer over the weekend. We're about to talk about another story coming up out of Atlanta where the officer was found not guilty of murder, but he was found guilty on some other charges as well. And I remember being at the church rally there in Fort Worth after Botham Jean was killed, and folks were just pressing the then Faith Johnson, who was then the DA, to try for murder. But again, what you often hear from these prosecutors is that, look, when you go for something along those lines, once it goes into the jury's hands, you don't know how they're going to respond, whether or not you frankly overcharged or not. But do you believe that people are getting a better understanding of the nuance of this legal system, and it's not as cut and dry as person gets shot, killed, murder, done, that's it, you're going to go away from life? Do you think that they're actually learning and understanding the nuances of this legal criminal justice system?
I think they only understand the nuances if, such as your show, you take the time to explain the nuances, because so many people think it will unfold like it unfolds on television. And we have 50 different states with 50 different jurisdictions. Because frankly, one of the other issues we had in this trial was no one paid attention, but during the punishment phase, there was an instruction about sudden passion. Now, I want to talk about that, not specific to Amber Guyger, but sudden passion was a move where if you believe that the accused acted on the provocation of someone else and that there was a sudden passion that provoked them to commit the act, then the punishment range could be reduced. Now, the state and the defense agreed to put that in the charge. I don't know that it belonged, but that was an agreement with. But there are so many different nuances.
Hold on, right there. So explain that. So if the prosecution and the defense agree, you can't overrule them. You have to go along with that agreement?
For some issues in the charge, I do.
Got
yes.
it. Got it.
For example, somebody might be charged with murder, and somebody might absolutely testify, I intentionally and knowingly shot them and intended to kill them. But both sides go, okay, well, let's also include a lesser included of manslaughter. There hadn't been any testimony about something being reckless, haphazard, but they can agree that they want to put a lesser included in the charge.
Judge Tammy Kemp, we appreciate you joining us and spending this amount of time sharing your thoughts in this particular case. Frankly, folks may not be satisfied with what you had to say, but the reality is you're the judge. This case moves forward. And as you said, depending upon what happens, depending upon appeals, it may very well come back to your courtroom. We certainly thank you for joining us on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, I just really appreciate you at least educating the public. And if nothing else, please implore your audience to participate on the jury panel. And for God's sake, don't get there and say, I can't judge people. We're not asking you to judge. Well, I'm asking you to judge a single moment in time. Only God is going to judge the person. But if you can, implore your audience to participate as jurors. Because that is one of my pet peeves. So many times we want to complain about the system, but we don't want to participate in the system. And participation requires you listening to the hard cases. I'm so very grateful that we had a diverse jury, but it was only because they said yes to their summons. So if you could just encourage your audience to participate in the criminal justice system. It can't get any better if we don't all work at it.
All right, Judge Tammy Kemp, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Good luck. All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, November 7th through the 11th, we're going to be in Cabo for the Luxe Jazz Experience, the second annual one. 14 different acts will be performing, including Gerald Albright, of course, over 3 days. If you want to attend, of course, go to LifeLuxeJazz.com, LifeLuxeJazz.com. But if you cannot make it, you can get your live streaming pass for $10.99 by going to GFNTV.com. That's GFNTV.com. Folks like Mark Curry, again, Gerald Albright, Alex Bouillon, Raul Madon, Incognito, Pieces of a Dream, Kirk Whalum, Average White Band, Donnie McClurkin, Shalea, Roy Ayers, Tom Brown, Ronnie Laws, Ernest Quarles, we all performing. It's going to be an amazing time, and trust me, you want to check it out. And so, if you want to get the live streaming, simply go to GFNTV.com. That's GFNTV.com to get the live stream pass for those 3 days. All right, folks, now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.